Okay, here at the GoldenComm Podcast, special guest, Paul Martin.
It's good to be here.
Now, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Quick setup story is we know some of the same people.
Yep.
Neighborhood, and I got something came in my LinkedIn dashboard that caught my eye.
Yeah.
So I messaged you.
Yeah.
Said, hey, I'd love for you to come on my podcast. And I didn't know if you knew me or not, but we do know some of the same people. So I felt good enough to do that. Thanks for writing back yes.
Of course.
So
Thank you for reaching out.
Yeah. So I said, we're going to, why don't we meet at Keen Coffee?
Yep.
And let's just get to know each other a little bit before today.
Yes.
And you were so nice. You brought all of these Coach Wooden books with you.
I did. I usually bring them with me everywhere, so don't feel too special. No, I'm kidding.
That's great.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into what we're going to talk about. But it was neat because it just shows me who you are. You'd researched me. I'm trying to research you. You've researched me. And I think you just think I want to talk about Coach Wooden, which makes perfect sense.
Yes.
So you've got all these books and you're ready to go. And I loved it, by the way. I loved listening to you talk about his values, how you use these different principles that he's taught us, all of us. And then at the end, I said, well, that is awesome. It's not why I reached out to you. I reached out to you for a very serious issue. So let's just get right into it.
Yes.
You have taken on this drug, fentanyl.
Yeah.
You have taken it on.
Yeah.
So a little bit about that. The organization that you have started, what's it called?
United Against Fentanyl.
United Against Fentanyl.
Yep. .org.
Okay.
To have a website.
So I know what fentanyl is, I think. Mm-hmm. I've heard that it's bad. Mm-hmm. I know that it kills. Mm-hmm. I am confused on fentanyl.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm confused. I'm hoping you can unconfuse me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the question. And all of us have heard about substance abuse and drugs our whole life, right? All of us know about the dangers of illicit drugs, and they've maybe killed friends of ours, and addiction. This is different. So everything you've ever heard about drugs, illicit substances, needs to basically be put on the back burner. Because what we're talking about here is a lethal poison. Where if you think about heroin or cocaine, for example, it takes a lot of those drugs to overdose. Where fentanyl is something that you can overdose with just, imagine a little penny sitting in front of you, and you see Abraham Lincoln, and to the right of Abe, you see the year, 2003. So imagine you're looking at that, and on the numbers 2 and 3, you see a little dust, perhaps, a little white dust, on the numbers 2 and 3. That's enough to kill you. And that's the problem with fentanyl. Okay, so this is going to open up all sorts of questions. Yeah.
Because I still don't understand it. Because people take fentanyl.
Yeah.
And why would anyone take poison? I always thought fentanyl was like cyanide, and you would never take cyanide.
Right.
So why would you take fentanyl? But before we get there, because I want to ask those questions, how did you get called to this? What in your tummy? I mean, you don't just wake up one day and decide war on fentanyl, but you have declared war on fentanyl. I want to know how that started.
Yeah, I mean, long story short, for about the last 2 decades, I've worked in nonprofit space, humanitarian space. I've always had a deep passion for young people in general. So about 20 years, I've been in this space, if you will. Most recently, CEO of a non-NGO that dealt with neglected, abused, abandoned kids. And so my heart has been in that space. I've worked across the state and the country and the world in the nonprofit space, but I was living in New Mexico. And in January, I moved there for a retreat/reset, and I thought I was just going to get away. And it was in northern New Mexico that I came face to face, if you will, with the epidemic of fentanyl.
So you're living in New Mexico, like a sabbatical, doing some writing?
Kind of, yes.
Because that's where I saw some of your podcasts. You were in this.
I mean, I'm up at 7,000 feet in a very rural area, in a beautiful, pristine, I mean, there's nothing around.
What's that called?
Abiquiu. So Abiquiu is where the very famous artist, Georgia O'Keeffe, visited in the 1920s and never left, basically. It's one of the most surreal and pristine parts of, some people say, the world. And I happened to have a friend, he had some property, and I was going to get away from a 4-year assignment working across the country and the world on child rights issues, and this is where I ran into fentanyl.
I see. So how did you how did you? There's no fentanyl up there.
No. So you have Santa Fe.
Yes.
And you have Abiquiu, which is where I was.
Right.
And on the drive, so I would fly into Santa Fe, drive up, and you drive through a little town called Espanola. And I would be there for 3 or 4 weeks, and I'd have to go on a trip, so I'd drive back down. But you have to drive through Espanola. And when I drove through this town of 10,000, I didn't know that at the time, you could see people walking down the street with their backs hunched over. You could see maybe half of the retail buildings boarded up. And you knew something wasn't right about Espanola. And I just was curious as to what was going on. And in early April, I read an article in the Los Angeles Times, a large article, 2,000 words, by a Pulitzer nominee author and a Pulitzer nominee photographer that went to Espanola to write about the fentanyl crisis there. And I thought, if the Los Angeles Times, basically our home paper, is going all the way out to northern New Mexico to write about the fentanyl epidemic in this town has a big problem. And so I started meeting some people in Espanola.
You get an article from the LA Times, investigative journalist, photography, well-written, fact-written, and it's the town that you drive through on your way to paradise, where you're having and then you drive through it again, and you do that multiple times.
Yeah, and the irony. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And then you feel compelled to stop.
I do, and the irony is Santa Fe is one of the fine arts capitals of the world.
No question.
Abiquiu, some have written, is one of the most geographically beautiful places in the world. And I kind of start thinking of the irony here, right? You have fine arts capital of the world. You have natural beauty capital of the world, some would say. I mean, there are many beautiful places. But I thought in the middle of it, you have some place that's so oppressed and depressed that the LA Times, an international news agency, is doing an article on it. So I start knocking on some doors, and I start trying to meet some people to see what's going on.
Right after you said, I'm going to take a little break.
Right, of course, as I tend to do. Some retreat, right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to take a break from this because I know you've had a heart and you've served and missioned and mentored kids for 3 decades.
Yeah. And some of it was, a sense of, look, I have all this experience. Mm-hmm. I've run organizations. I've worked in D.C. a lot. What can I do, even if it's mentoring someone, or I don't know. And so I end up teaching in the high school. I end up getting my substitute credential, and I love kids. And if you want to know what's going on in any city or anywhere, ask teenagers. They're going to tell you.
Yeah.
And so I started working in Espanola Valley High School as a substitute teacher. I started working at Espanola Valley High School as a substitute teacher, and also met the man featured in the Times article, who runs the only fentanyl rehab center in Espanola, and started mentoring him.
I see. So he's a young guy.
24.
He's 24, right? So I read the article.
Yeah.
So you met with him.
Yes.
And also, would you meet the principal and say, how do I teach here?
Yeah, sorry, I got distracted by that. Yeah, I started teaching, met the principal, and they see me and they're like, "You're not from here."
Right.
I look like this. It's kind of how I dress, I guess. And some people were wondering what I was doing, and really, Jason, my heart was just to figure out what was going on.
Okay, so what is going on?
So, a couple things. As the article states, they didn't make Breaking Bad in New Mexico on a fluke. The state has a long history with substance abuse, going back in Espanola to the Chinese Railroad, opioids, heroin. And so you have this pre-existing drug culture in Espanola and other parts of New Mexico. And by drug culture, I mean that you have great-grandparents, grandparents, and parents. This is going to sound shocking, that in a sense have a sense of pride that heroin especially is part of our culture. It's not necessarily seen as this great vice. It's more part of what made Espanola in a sense. And you see that in certain urban cities as well, right? There's a sense of this is who we are, don't mess with us. Fentanyl absolutely was a game changer. Fentanyl is like heroin. So why do people become addicted to it? Because if you've ever had a major injury and you've been given any kind of opioid, we all know it kind of feels good. It's relaxing. I mean, I have before. And that's why we have such a high addiction. That's why West Virginia, for example, is the state with the most per capita deaths because of the minors. Opioids were prescribed. People get addicted like this to opioids. And so, I forgot what your question was. So.
Well, it's just the folks in New Mexico. So, well, this is a good time for me to understand fentanyl. So, my wife, when she gave birth, she had an epidural.
Yeah.
In her epidural, most likely there is some fentanyl.
Yeah.
So it's not like fentanyl is something that is unuseful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Because my wife wanted the epidural. She
Yeah.
didn't want to do a natural childbirth. She wanted to take some of the pain away. But it seems so. And then people they take fentanyl.
Yeah.
That's how they get addicted. And when I heard fentanyl is killing people, I always thought fentanyl was like I said, like a cyanide.
Yeah.
It sounds like it can turn into cyanide if it isn't done right.
Yeah.
What I mean, or is it just your DNA makeup? Some people just don't have the ability to process whatever fentanyl is, because if so many people are taking fentanyl and they're taking fentanyl because it's cheap, and they get addicted, why is it that a little pin can kill you when all these people are taking it and they aren't dying?
The reason why is because heroin's expensive, right? Heroin comes from poppy seeds.
Yeah.
It's expensive.
Okay.
And we make fentanyl, it's a synthetic drug. And so the Chinese started getting onto this business opportunity, if you will, and started creating what they call illicit fentanyl.
Okay.
And adding it to drugs. And so you have people who take the little blue pill, that's fentanyl. They know what they're taking.
Yes.
They're getting high on fentanyl because it's much cheaper than heroin.
Okay.
And so in New Mexico and in Espanola, you see people walking up and down the street. They are taking fentanyl. They know that they're taking fentanyl. They smoke it. They get some tinfoil, and they basically inhale the smoke.
Very addictive.
Highly addictive.
Like crazy.
Like heroin.
Sure.
I mean, you're hooked.
Right.
You're gone.
Right.
You're a zombie.
You're not dead, but you're hooked.
And you're potentially dead. But the big issue, and this is probably the most important thing I'll say, is that the fentanyl arrives usually in Mexico, from China, sometimes India. And what the cartels have gotten onto is an incredible business opportunity. So because fentanyl's so cheap, they could lace Oxycontin pills that aren't Oxycontin.
Right.
They're fake pills, right?
Right.
And they put just a little bit of fentanyl in them. And somebody, like, I was in D.C. last week. I met a woman. Her daughter I think she was a gymnast. She had an accident. This happens, right? She was given oxycodone, right, for her pain. This happens all the time. 6 months later, the girl is taken off of Oxy, but she's addicted. And so what does she do? She goes on Snapchat, and she finds Oxy. Well, guess what?
It's not Oxy.
This is the problem. It's not. It looks exactly like an Oxy pill. You cannot tell the difference, whether it's Adderall, whether it's Oxy, whether it's Molly, these drugs that are out there. She thinks she's taking an Oxy pill, and she's dead like that. Because the margin for error, and this is something that you asked me earlier, the margin for error is almost zero. 3 grains of salt, think of 3 grains of salt, is about the amount of fentanyl that it would take to kill you. So when these cartels are making the pills for profit, they just mess up a little bit and you're dead.
Okay. It makes so much more sense to me now. Okay, let me play back what I hear. Let's say I'm a drug person selling drugs, and I sell marijuana.
Yeah.
But my marijuana is cheap, and it's just average marijuana. I take a little bit of this fentanyl, and I sprinkle it in my marijuana, and I sell it. And now I'm known as the guy with the really good stuff.
Yeah, but if you've seen Breaking Bad, the blue stuff, wow, this is amazing.
I got the good stuff.
This
right?
Joey's got the great stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
Jason.
this person who tries to smoke marijuana gets it from someone who gets it from someone, and then I get a bad batch of this stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And then I just do my sprinkle, and then you have let's say a kid that smokes marijuana dies from fentanyl.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
And the whole thing's a crisis.
Yeah.
The whole thing's a crisis.
And so roughly 109,000 Americans dying of drug overdoses. But within that number, you have this unbelievable exponential increase of deaths due to fentanyl. That's the issue. And the big problem, Jason, is that there is no immediate end in sight. We have enough fentanyl in this country right now where if we close the border and blew up all the cartel factories, we are in really, really big trouble. It's cheap, and these people that are making money off of it don't care that much. If they can make their money and sprinkle a little bit in an Adderall pill, or selling you heroin, but it's powder with just a little bit of fentanyl, that's the problem.
All right. Tell us about your organization.
So, I was not planning on moving to New Mexico to start another campaign, but I've spent 6-7 months kind of embedded there in the city, working in the schools, working with the shelters, and seeing, if you will, the end of where the stuff ends up from China through Mexico onto the streets of Espanola. And when you talk about child welfare, when we talk about children, when we talk about our nation's children, or even our nation's young people, right, teenagers, maybe even people in their early 20s, there's not a person around, there's not a parent around that doesn't get very concerned about the trajectory of our nation. In the history of our nation, we've never had a drug problem like this. The DEA itself has said we have never, ever had an issue like this. And because of my background and because of my understanding of how the nonprofit space works, I have a background in politics and an understanding of the way that social campaigns work. I felt that I needed to leverage my time because, to me, if you think of a coin again, child abuse, neglect, and abandonment is one side of the coin, but substance abuse is always the other side of the coin. Most children that end up in foster care, for example, there are 500,000 of them, usually their parents were addicts. And so you really can't talk about child welfare, child rights, protecting our children, foster care, and for that matter, prostitution, sex trafficking, homelessness, academic failure, incarceration. You really can't talk about these things without talking about drugs. And I have found myself, in working in the kind of one of the epicenters in the country, a calling, if you will, to start United Against Fentanyl.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm amazing. Thank you for coming. We're going to have to get you back here.
I'd love to
get an update from you. Where can people go to keep track of this, or maybe help out? Is there anything, a resource or URL that you can point them to, or what?
Yeah, I would be really grateful, and thank you for asking. We just launched this.
Yeah.
It's unitedagainstfentanyl.org.
Okay.
It's United Against Fentanyl on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, and on Facebook. And we want to, we're not going to stop fentanyl from coming in, although I am going to be hopefully taking a trip to Honduras and Guatemala to see for myself where the stuff's coming from. It's going to be about education. And I'm telling you right now, there was a presidential debate the other day. The word fentanyl was brought up 20 to 30 times. This is a word everyone's heard of.
Right.
But still very few people know about the cost and the risk to our country,
I don't think
our
they do.
Communities, and our children.
Yeah, I think I'm a parent. I think the Reader's Digest version is, hey kids, not to take this fentanyl, right? That isn't it.
Yeah.
That's not it. I mean, obviously, don't take fentanyl, but that isn't it. It is a very complex problem.
Absolutely.
It is very complex. I cannot thank you enough for explaining it to me.
I appreciate you having me.
I will explain it to others. We'll start by taking this and snipping it up and cutting it and sending it to you and others, and I'll probably go talk to the high school about some of these clips.
Great.
And hopefully we can get the word out.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Paul, thanks for coming.
Thanks, Jason.
Appreciate it.